already muted themselves. I think it'd be best if most of us do that now. I'm going to be turning this over to David. Our primary goal tonight is to look at a couple of updated versions of our 10-year financial plan with a few assumptions, different ones on the two different plans. Hopefully you've been able to pull those up yourself, maybe print them if you wanted to or have them available. Johanna will be showing those on the screen. And David, you're prepared to walk us through the two different ones as an initial, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussions. So let's do it one plan at a time. What we're calling version C first. And Joanna, if you can bring that up on the screen for everyone. And after David has gone through this with us, then we'll let you raise your hand if you have questions or comments. Okay, David. I'd like. Okay. All right, David, it's all yours.
Okay, well, John, I will start. I want your input and everyone's input as the times will dictate that this will be a fluid document, but we are using this as a starting point. On this version C, because of the assessments won't be reevaluated till next year, we're assuming a flat 2021 tax revenue from the tax mill levy. And then in 2022, it incorporates a 10% reduction in that number as a test case, and then gradually starts to increase again from there. We did decide to leave the other income, specific ownership tax and all the others as a flat number for now until we discuss it more. Under the expenditures, this version also for 2021 and 22 is basically flat, same numbers as 2020. And then after 2022, it increases by the normal 2% per year. Again, this is just a starting point John and I discussed with, and as you all probably know, as we know, we're really uncertain what to expect on most of this. And so that's why we just decided to go with this 10% decrease and kind of see how it would flow out into the chart. And even with that, and with the flat expenses in 21 and 22, you can see that by 22 with a 10% decrease, we would be already showing a deficit, a little bit of spending. The idea was to see when and if we were to dip into our reserve funds to keep the current services going. And John, I'm not sure what else you want to go through. I will say that at the bottom on the account balances, there is some work to do on those, but those are more just logistics of kind of which pocket the money's in. I mean, we will be mindful of maintaining the required policy minimums for the reserve accounts. But until we have some more firm numbers we want to work with, the historical numbers are accurate. It's only the projected numbers that will get switched around as needed. So we will focus mostly on the upper part of the revenue and expenditures. Any comment at this point, John?
Okay, yeah. So I'll take any questions or comments from folks. Joanna, if you scroll back up to the top, please. Yeah, that's good. So this is the part we'll focus on mostly. Notation from me is our historical has only gone down a couple of times on general property tax mill levy revenue. You see in this version between 2018 and 2019, we had a drop. However, that drop was primarily because in 2018 we had an unusual extra element on the income from a previous element that the county, I guess, made up is the best way for me to say it. And so that drop wasn't true to the actual property value kind of revenue. The extra increase that year from 2017 to 2018 was almost 18%. And that's very unusual. And it was that one line item increase for that year. So the 2017 to 2019 really shows the kind of increase we've had. We had a decrease. I can't remember the exact year. Maybe Claudine does. It was maybe 2013 to 14 or someplace in there, that time frame.
It was right in there, yeah.
So the increases that David has shown in the out year starting 2023, that year is after the 10% decrease, the prior year is a 5% increase and approximately 4% on each year out from there, which are very reasonable numbers compared to what we've seen historically. Okay, so as David said, the idea of this for us was, okay, what happens if we have a decrease, a significant decrease in the future year, flat, doesn't hurt us too bad. As you can see from 2020 to 2021, we're still in a net positive cash flow. If we stick with a flat expenditure. But actually, if we had done it with the increase we'll see in the next one, we don't go negative anyway in 2021. Okay, time for you to have any comments or questions. If you know how to raise your
John, just so there's,
I'm sorry, David.
Just a minor point. I don't want there being confusion. There are two columns. The 2020 budget and the 2020 plan are exactly the same. The 2020 plan further in this year will become the estimated numbers down the road. I just didn't want there to be any confusion that those are identical columns.
Yeah, right. They are for now. What we've done in the past is the out years that you see here are our plan or potential plan. And we would show that, and then we show what our actual budget is, if those are different, and many years they are slightly different. Okay, when we finally get the information from the county. Questions, folks? Ann, I see you trying to talk, maybe.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay.
I'm just going to let David do all the work.
Well, thank you, Ann. Until there's a question, John, I will also point out that.
Pardon? Who has a question?
I will point out on the expense. Oh.
Go ahead, David.
If Bill has a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, just two.
No, I was just going to point out that. Bill, you want to go ahead?
Okay. So the projection for 2022 with us going into the red, about $36,000, assumes that our property tax income goes down by 10%. If it goes down by 20%, then would that deficit just double to about 72,000? So that's one thing. And then I assume we could cover that with our reserves without any problem. And the third question for 21, 22, 23, are we including, cost of living increases for our employees? And that's all.
Bill, on your first question, another 10% would actually be, depending on which 10%, on the order of another 170 to 180,000. It wouldn't just be a doubling of that 35,000. So it would be a significant negative number of points. And for 21 and 22, there is no allowance for increase in the expenditures at all, which would include pay raises or anything like that.
Right, this version we did to show things flat. So there'd be no salary increases unless Claudine can submit a budget that cuts other places and gives some kind of salary increases. Probably not a general cost of living. My assumption would be that if we have that kind of decrease, then the cost of living isn't going up. That's not necessarily true, but our ability to pay it probably would not be there. Although the board could choose to dip into the long term even more in order to do that. And we're going to show you a second version here in a minute that does have the continuation of 2% on expenditures throughout. But that's the next version.
So I guess I do have a fourth question, and then I'll shut up. So if there was a 20% decrease in income from property tax, would we, and that's a much larger number in deficit, then would we be able to handle that okay with operating reserve? I mean, it would take a big bite out of it.
It would take a big bite, Bill, and we would be able to do that for a short term, like a year like that. But if that continued on, then that ability to do that would decrease significantly.
So if the property value, maybe I'm being too dark here, but if the property valuations did go down by 20%, then they would be lower for the next at least 2 years, maybe 3 years. So we would really be needing to look at program cuts and staff cuts. I mean, is that a reasonable projection?
That would definitely be a possibility to have to consider at that point. Yes.
If we had that level, that's correct. I would remind everyone that in 2013, none of the rest of you were on the board, I don't think, at that time. When we went to the public with our mill levy increase, part of our communication to everyone was that we would not come back with any kind of tax element change, increase for 10 years. That we would manage our income and creating the long-term reserve such that we would not come back before 2023. We have sufficient funds right now in the long term to do that, even with what Bill's suggesting as a 20% kind of decrease, which quite frankly, I cannot envision, given what the assessors have done with valuations. We have never experienced, even with significant downturns in the economy, any kind of decrease in that kind of magnitude. Kay,
I just wanted to
ask a question.
I guess I'm kind of on Bill's wavelength that it may not be a 20%, but I think we could very well see a decrease. But I think it also may not jump after 1 year. I think that when you look at the unemployment numbers and just how the economy is looking today and what the economists are saying, they're talking about a recovery that could last, 8-10 years before we're back. So I think we have to really watch the numbers very carefully and not be so quick just to jump into the reserves, because we might have, to deal with this for several years.
Okay, appreciate that. Anyone else? And Cindy, I invite you to participate in the discussions tonight. We wanted you here for that reason. Yes, Claudine, unmute yourself.
I wanted to bring up the kind of difficult to follow dialogue around what happens when the Gallagher Amendment and Tabor tussle and what that's going to do to our 10-year plan. And I don't pretend to understand all the implications, but I wonder if there is a way in which we can look at our 10-year plan with some understanding of what the Gallagher Amendment might do to our assessed rate.
Well, the Gallagher doesn't affect the assessed rate. Assessed valuations is our county assessor. What it does on the revenue side is decrease the rate at which the residential piece is adjusted, with so far without any legislative action, would suggest that the rate would go down just like it did last year and the 2 years before. And this is a kind of a 2-year kind of piece to it on the way assessments are done. And so far, if you look at 2019 to 2020, that the assessed values, even though Gallagher moved and the legislation let it go down some, although not as much as Gallagher would have called for, we had a 15% increase in from a revenue standpoint. And as I said earlier, my experience looking at this back as far as 2008, when we started, well, actually it went back a little bit before that when we first started doing this 10-year look. We looked back a number of years to do projections forward. We've only had 2 downturns of any size at all, and none of them have been of the magnitude of 5% even. And that includes the 2008-9 recession. So maybe I'm overly optimistic compared to some of the comments I'm hearing, but I take your comments seriously. We do need to look at and keep abreast. So far, the legislature state has decided to ameliorate the decrease caused by Gallagher and modify how much that would have been otherwise. And our county assessors, we've had either 2 or 3 now since I've been around, keep saying values are going up. I'm waiting to see something go down. The big thing that we've heard, or I've heard at least recently, is businesses wanting an adjustment this year for being closed. Now that's on the commercial, or that's non-residential side. That's a 29% rate on them from Gallagher standpoint. And of course, we don't have on a percentage basis as much non-residential as lots of counties, or some counties at least do. So things we need to keep watching for sure. Any other comments on this particular example? Any requests from anyone on doing another version? David has told me, and I've done these in the past myself when I was the treasurer, changing the numbers, percentages, so forth. Not that difficult. If there's something you'd like to see as an example for the out years change, please speak up and we'll run those and have those available at the board meeting.
Yeah, I guess I can start talking. I'm not real comfortable with flatlining employees' salaries. If it's, I know this is Claudine's area to make recommendations, but I don't think as a matter of principle, we should make our employees suffer because the overall economic environment is poor. If we can afford it, I think, and if Claudine requests it, I think we should do everything we can to provide an appropriate increase for employees. That may be Pollyannish thinking, I don't know. And the second thing is I actually would like to see what it would actually look like in detail with maybe not a 20%, maybe a 15% decrease. And one that assumes that the property tax revenue won't snap back after 1 year, that it may in fact be depressed, for 2 years or 3 years. If that's too much extra work, don't do it, but
Nope.
I think it might be interesting to look at that.
So you're saying on the 2 years that it stays down at that level for the 2 years. That's kind of what happens. The adjustment from every 2 years, the in-between year that's not the major adjustment is usually a very small increase to close to flat sometimes. So that's what you're suggesting there, and then starting back with some kind of level of modest increase, Bill?
Yeah, well, I'm saying if it goes down, say 15%, and it stays down for a year or two, what does that look like? So that's one dimension. The other dimension is pretty much exactly what we already have in this spreadsheet, but what would it look like if we gave our typical increases to staff?
Okay, so the 2% increase in expenditures, but a 15% decrease, that is flat. That 15% is flat for 2 years, and then start increasing again. That's what I'm hearing.
Precisely. That's it, precisely. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
I just want to say I agree with Bill. And I'm curious, and you may have said this and I missed it, but how did you decide on the 10%?
Just pulled it out of the air. Just pulled it out of the air.
Cool.
I was hearing folks' feelings and thinking that there's going to be a decrease. Mm-hmm. Looking at history, it's never been as large as 10%. So I thought that was a pretty large decrease personally. So we can do it with 15 or any other number. And we've got one suggestion, and David and I can work on that and have that updated. If there's other requests. Let's then look at version D, which is much more optimistic. There it is. And Dave, you want to explain what we did here?
Yeah, in version D, we kind of left the revenue flat for the next 2 years and included the 2% per year increase in expenses without any abatement of that whatsoever. So that would be more of what you're looking to see, Bill, but we can absolutely update it quite easily with the 15% drop and see what that's going to do. I will add to what Bill's comments that I think we all agree that, a high priority would be to keep the staff levels of salary moving upward if possible. I guess I would state that as trustees, our first obligation is to make sure the library is sound. So it's a balancing act, but I fully agree that it would be our best case to keep the employees able to make a living wage too.
Okay, and I would note that on 2023 here, while we're saying we're going to keep it flat into next year, given that we already have the property valuations that affect that, Uh, although there could be some adjustments up through August this year. Then 2022 being flat to that instead of going down a significant amount. Starting 2023, you're looking at only about a 1% increase.
And that was arbitrary too, Bill, kind of alluding to Beth's question. The 10% was when we discussed arbitrary, but we had to have a starting place to start considering these. And I agree with what John's saying, is that any suggestions about other scenarios we could produce quite easily.
But this does show the continuing to spend at this same kind of 2% increase on all aspects of our expenditure budgets, with the exception, of course, of capital. Those were forecast kind of maintenance capital things for the most part in the out years. So we see that if we can stay flat over the next 3 years, well, this year through 2022, we never go into the red all the way to the out years, assuming some level of slight, very slight increases starting in 2023.
And John, I want to reiterate what you did just say, that the plan does include scheduled capital facility maintenance projects, but it does not include any discretionary capital projects at all.
Right. And as you know, we've asked, I think everyone knows, we discussed before that we've asked Claudine to not plan to do the capital that we had in the budget for this year until further notice. And that one was the staff room remodel.
John?
Yes, Claudine.
And David, so I want to put in the mix, not necessarily that it's part of the work the board is doing on the 10-year strategic financial plan, but as a reminder, in 2020, Cindy and I were tasked to review the whole compensation package from from the shelver to the director. And we already have some pretty clear insights that the top and the bottom are fairly competitive, but it's the folks in the middle that will require some correction. And you might remember, an easy way to remember this is the apartments on the second floor of the bookshop are about average for mid-level workers in the Estes Valley, and that our mid-level workers are not paid enough to stay on their salary within the bookstore apartments. So it's just a quick way of remembering, that frame of what we're correcting. So please know I hear you and deeply appreciate the commitment to 2% across the board. I'll tell you right now, what you're probably going to get from me among the scenarios that you've asked me to produce with Cindy's help are scenarios that recognize that the top and the bottom are competitive and the middle is not. So I will not, unless directed, be focusing on 2%. I'll be focusing on competitive wages based on the various scale in the library.
Yeah, thank you, Claudine. I appreciate that. And what, for everyone's benefit on this plan, this kind of 10-year plan, we haven't tried to direct Claudine to specific numbers with regard to the salary adjustments and so forth. The idea was that we wanted to be committed to an overall, for the entire expenditure base, 2% increase, which particularly included materials purchase. So how she distributes that overall 2% on salaries is what she presents to us within her budget. It's not our directive to say everyone gets 2%. So sorry if that was the way it had come out before.
I think that's a very good point, John, because salaries could increase by 4% and other areas of acquisition or whatever decrease to average out to that 2%.
Exactly. That's her operations responsibility. So any other scenarios from seeing these two versions besides the one Bill brought up? We've captured that. Anyone want to see any other variations on this plan to help us out now? Normally, we would see a projection from the county in August. That's been put off a month, 2 months. It's going to be a month and a half approximately, I guess. Right, Claudine? Early October is the date that we'll get from the county our first draft estimate for revenue for next year. So we'll be playing around with this for a while before we have any hard numbers on next year, for sure.
It's a reminder, John, that the foundation, based on the MOU, will be making their projection of revenue at the June meeting. So in just a couple of weeks, Annie, I suspect, or perhaps Sarah, but somebody will be there to give their best projection of changes to revenue from them. So just remember, they're not too small a contributor, and what they're able to do will have impact.
Right. Well, they'll have to do that portion, which whatever they determine is their executive director's salary. That's an straight obligation. The additions to that that we can apply to programs, that'll be the possible question mark. The last I talked with Annie, she thought things were progressing and that their funds and so forth were such that they'd be able to meet for next year the same kind of level of 200,000. So we'll wait and get their official, of course. Thank you. Other thoughts, comments on it, either of these examples? And any requests for a different version?
John, I'm going to go ahead and input a little bit more on my concerns, because obviously our biggest revenue is the mill levy. But when we're going to be stretching budgets and stuff, even though the other items are going to be significant. And
I'm sorry, David, I didn't understand that.
We've always been a little bit, we have so many unknowns coming up. We've always been conservative in budgeting for the specific ownership tax, and it's always come in higher. And so even on this one, it's a little bit more conservative, even than what the 2019 final was, as well as interest and stuff. But I'm really waiting to find out what's going to happen with the Friends and Foundation. I sure hope they can keep up that commitment, but I think that's, to me, an unknown. Interest, I have no idea how that's going to play out. And the specific ownership tax, I have a gut feeling that that may be lower too, but that, again, unknowns, hard to predict.
I agree. Okay, you were mentioning some things earlier. Is there a different version you'd like to see here?
No, I think with the additional version that Bill requested, I think that's more of a worst case scenario. You know, kind of give us if the trend goes that way. I think to do lots of different scenarios, as David said, there was so many unknowns. We just kind of have a best case, middle probability, and then a worst case, and then we just continue to, as we get the numbers, plug them in.
Okay.
Ron, can I just
Claudia,
make
how
a
about
comment?
you? Oh, I'm sorry, Cindy, go ahead.
There's no other version I want to see other than what we've already discussed. But from a pure accounting standpoint, what I do want to say is, you know, our revenue is really an unknown. Nobody can really predict that right now. But what we do have control over is our costs. And we haven't started yet working on our best, worst, and middle case scenarios that we're going to do later this month. But I think once we go through that exercise, we might have a better idea on how we can control costs. Because I do agree with Kay, we don't want to just look to our reserves right away. We need to hold on to them for as long as we can because we don't know how long this recovery is going to take.
Okay, appreciate that. Of course, the reserve is there for these very situations. It was to help us get out to 10 years for one thing, but income, basic revenue has helped us do that, even beyond the 10 years that we promised our patrons. But in addition, then that long-term reserve was to meet situations like this. I guess my personal position on this is I would hate to, if you would, go negative with regard to our staffing and our programs on a short-term issue. If we find and get the kind of information later this year that this could possibly be longer term, and I appreciate what Kay said as far as what the economists are saying on a full recovery, but we're not looking at sales. We're looking at property tax valuations. And I think we have a pretty good historical picture to look at as to what's been happening on that. And I've seen personally, with the exception of the request from businesses to have a break, I've seen no evidence that county assessors are going to think that valuations are going down. I'll stand corrected when we see their first estimate for the future, but I'd be surprised if there is what I would call at least a significant downturn there, but we'll see. Okay. Anyone have anything else on the 10-year plan element? Because I have one other kind of topic here that I'm going to bring up. I've already briefly discussed with Cindy before the finance committee and staff. In the past, when we created this and created the long-term reserve, we were supposed to actually move money out of the operating fund as it was in excess into the long-term, making sure also our short-term met our financial policy, which is a 3-month reserve in the short term. And then we have our capital reserve, which was, we had originally designated it was certain funds from a bond fund that we had, and we just made that the capital fund, and it's just earning interest. So it's above the 100,000, and that's fine. We can leave that as is for future considerations. But the long term, we have not been actually within the Colo Trust funds themselves that are identified as short-term operating fund and long-term reserve fund. We haven't been moving the money. So my request is that happen as of for the end of 2019. And David, then what we need to do is update this plan at the bottom for those numbers and the projections out of how much would be in the long term. So we would really know, there you're seeing at the very bottom, it says, 119,000 every year. Well, it's not going to be 119. It is established by how much has to be kept in the operating reserve for the coming year, in the short term for emergency situations, and then the rest goes into the long term. So I'm asking that portion of this be updated, as well as the correct amounts be moved in the Colo Trust identified funds. I don't know if the auditors looked at that or not, other than our policy says a certain amount has to be in the operating fund at the end of the year to start us off for the new year, and a certain amount for emergency situations in the short term. So I'd like to get those updated, please. There's not an urgency to do that, but I think by the time we're actually doing budget in the fall, in September, October, starting off, we need to have that corrected.
Yes, John, thank you for that up. That actually has been on the table, because my question has been, when is it actually triggered to make these transfers? And we will talk about that Monday in the Finance Committee meeting and follow through with what your request is here.
Yeah, basically, once we have the 13th month numbers, that's when we should actually go in and ask Cindy to move those things in the Colo Trust fund so that they're the right amount.
John, let me be clear about that, though. Is that something that we request? Because in the past, it was something that I believe Karen took care of. Is it something that we should be physically asking our ST?
Unfortunately, Karen was not always doing that. He was leaving the funds with the interest that had accumulated, and we weren't always getting it done at the end of the year.
Well, please let me take responsibility for that. And I agree, David, that should be an operational calendar item. And you have my commitment, because I'm so mighty and strong with Cindy beside me, that we will make that something you don't have to ask for again. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. It's something we kind of let go to some extent, because in our report monthly that the board sees, it's just the total of all of the funds. And we're very healthy that way. And I'm not overly concerned about it. I think, though, it's appropriate for us to keep those and have them then input to this spreadsheet, so we have a better picture out how much do we have in that long term that can help it carry us over times like we think we're facing now.
John, let me just continue with your thought there, because I fully agree with you. We need those numbers correct to make this 10-year plan more functional. I kind of feel myself, we've gotten a little bit complacent because revenue has been consistent. We've done fairly well, with doing what we're doing, and all of a sudden here we are. Kay brought up a good point to me that I hope to follow up on, is how accurate has the 10-year plans actually been in the past? Are we on target with our parameters and stuff? So that's something I want to follow on too, is just, will that give me any insight on our past performance on how to make the future forecast better?
Okay, I think that's a very good idea. I've looked at it. I certainly looked at it continuously when I was treasurer. And again, as I've said, every year since I've been involved, our revenue side has been higher than what we've projected in our plan. One year exception. So.
Well, and that's such a good track record, I think, is why maybe I myself was a little bit complacent in following up on something like that. And I think now is a pertinent time to pursue all avenues to do the best we can with the 10-year plan.
And David, I can help you with that too.
Yeah, great, Kate.
I think it would be great if you got involved with that. Again, none of the rest of you were on the board, I don't think, when this was created. I wasn't on the board. I was on the foundation board president, and so I was part of it. When Don Bryson first started this 10-year outlook financial plan, all revenue, tax revenue was flat all the way out. And he was considering that kind of the worst case scenario, if you would, being able to continue for 10 years without going back to the public for a mill levy increase request. And with the reserves that we were building up in the early years of that, after we did pass that mill levy in 2013, we were just getting out 10 years. Well, in 2023, that'll be the 10th year. Even with this downturn coming up, we can go several years beyond, even if things stayed low. Claudine, do you want to share a little bit about the library, the other library that sent you the information about de-Gallagherizing? Would you like to bring that up?
Sure. I'm going to have to dig deep, John. I would have to look through my notes. There's movement among a handful of libraries to consider de-Gallagherizing, which, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is a way in which to fix the rate rather than it be variable with growth or decline in valuation. So you've heard me say in the past, and in fact, I got an email from Chief Wolf today. He just, per my request, he forwards a lot of the material that comes from the exceedingly well organized group of fire chiefs in the state. So they are pushing very hard for all fire districts to de-Gallagherize, as ours did last year, our local one. So the libraries, John and trustees, are beginning the conversation. So of whether or not it is valuable to de-Gallagherize. So John, I really appreciate your perspective. It always kind of delights me that the engineer president of the board is the most optimistic of our financial future. But I would like to understand a little bit more about the libraries that are considering it. For example, they're all independent taxing districts, right? I mean, obviously, a municipal system isn't doing it and a county system, but there are some hybrid funding sources for libraries. So, John, if I may, I'd like to come back and learn more about those peers so I can be a better reporter. Just like our local fire district is a hybrid funded model of both town sales tax and then now fixed property tax. Let me come back with better information. Is that all right?
Sure. I just wanted us to come up, Claudine forwarded to the government affairs. I don't know if you sent it to finance or not. You might want to do that.
Okay.
Something that was passed, an election that was passed by one of the libraries. I'm not sure which one it was.
Yeah, that's down in the Southwest, Pagosa Springs. I can't think of the name of the district. Yeah,
right.
They did. Mm-hmm.
Right. So they went to, their ballot box and asked for a, if you will, de-Gallagherizing and fixing the rate instead of having it float the way the Gallagher Amendment allows for. And as Claudine said, that's what the fire district did 2 years ago now, or 3.
I thought it was 1. Yeah.
Just 1 year?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's further discussion that we can certainly have. I will strongly oppose our considering actually trying to do that before 2023. That's what we promised our public, our voters when we passed 2013. And I think we need to stick to it because we have the funds to be able to do that. And I would be strongly opposed to trying to circumvent that promise that we made. But we ought to look at it and be prepared. To go to an election, you need more than a year's advance planning to get ready to submit for that and so forth. So I'm okay with our further discussing and getting more information on that. Anyone have any questions on that topic? Bill, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Bill.
Not a question on that topic.
Okay.
And I hope this is appropriate to bring up, but good boards take care of their CEOs, and I'm just wondering how Claudine is doing. This has got to be a terribly stressful time. And if there's anything the board can do to support her.
Thank you. Claudine?
Extremely kind, Bill. I am doing extremely well, I think. And I'm not, it sounds like so much hot air. With the tactical team meets now twice a week by Zoom, and the assignments out there are large. They're based on caring for one another in a safe way, making sure we're doing the right procedures and sanitation supplies. And it's so much more meaningful now as we think about folks' health and safety. And and I know you are extremely proud of the planning and the effort and the work that has gone so far quite well. So thank you, Bill. I appreciate the board's support for a few mental health days for everyone on staff. Those are set to expire in June, so folks are really using it. I'm pleased to say. There's been a lot of creativity among the staff. For our next phase, we keep coming up with micro phases, like back in the day, Microsoft updates. It's 2.255 phase for the library. But there's a lot of momentum now about with the variants for the county and the fact that the new health orders, even from the state, are more relaxed. And so we're taking seriously plans to open the library on a limited basis in late June. I'll have a lot more information for you in advance of your regular board meeting. But Bill, I'm doing very well. The staff is only beginning, I think, to hit the wall of working from home and preparing for opening the front door. But, we're looking at things like, rather than having curbside service 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, if we open the front doors, that will be for half a day. And then curbside will be the other half, so that patrons have choices and that we're not asking the staff to do double time. So thank you for asking about me. I'm really supported by a pretty exemplary team. Thank you.
I just want to share a data point. I went to Cypher for the first time a couple of days ago and observed a confrontation between the individual at the front who was making sure people were wearing their masks. And then later on, I talked to a friend who works there. He said that at least 3 times they've had to call the police because people refuse to wear masks. And one guy even threatened to go and get a gun from a car. So I'm sure you're much more aware of those things than I am, but I just really don't want our wonderful staff endangered or in any way. I know that's at the top of your agenda too, but I know there'll be community pressure to open up, and anyway, I've said enough. So
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Bill, it is the question of the hour for us. It's not about opening. It's not about preparing for adversity. It's about the politicization of the mask and ways in which we can, authentic isn't quite the right word, but effectively have policies that we can legitimately enforce. And that's the question of the hour. Scanning library land, from what I understand of the 60 plus libraries that have responded, what's your stance on masks and opening? Because it's what we talked about today at the staff level. The health orders, as they were recently enacted, even at the state level, are set to expire July 1st. So one of two things is going to happen. There'll be a new health order, or they're going to expire, and that will be the end of it. So what is the level of conflict we need to prepare for and engage in? How much is the staff willing to tolerate? Right. And then if we're going to enforce it, who's doing the actual enforcement? So those are the questions. The ordinary behavior of social distancing and sanitizing and the bathrooms and the computers, we got this. Thank you for sharing in our sometimes bewildered planning around what we're going to do around those situations. So thank you, Bill.
I appreciate that feedback. Anyone have anything else on this topic? Okay. Anyone have anything that they'd like to express, share at this point before we close the meeting? Don't see anyone trying to get my attention. I appreciate your attendance. I hope the discussion made sense to everyone, especially on the finance side. We've charged the finance committee and treasurer Cindy to work to update, do another version, and hopefully we can have that at the June meeting, that version, and we'll just have it there for any questions or discussions to see what it looks like. That'll be part of finance committee agenda item. And otherwise, everyone stay safe. Take care of yourselves and your family. And we'll see everyone on the computer screen on June 15th at 6:30 or before. And with that, I will adjourn our study session and instruct Joanna she can stop recording and streaming.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Thank
Finance
everyone.
Committee.
Claudine, a moment of your time,